What if I told you that humanity's greatest mystery had been captured on video? Scientists placed a camera in a coffin, and what they saw left everyone speechless. Get ready, you'll never look at life or death the same way again. Death is one of humanity's greatest mysteries. What happens when everything ends? Is there something beyond, or is the end just silence? A group of scientists decided to explore this question in a radical way by installing a camera in a coffin during a strictly controlled experiment. What was supposed to be simple research turned into something no one could have predicted. What they recorded shook even the most skeptical and caused the whole team to panic. But before we tell you what really happened, we need to understand how this story began, and why the answer could change everything you believe. The mystery of what happens after death has intrigued humanity since the dawn of human consciousness. Philosophers, religionists, and scientists have spent centuries proposing answers, some comforting, others terrifying. But deep down, no one knows for sure. Death is the only inevitable event for everyone, but it is also the most unknown. It was this search for answers that led renowned neuroscientist Dr. Richard Vance to start the project that would later become known as limit codes. Dr. Vance has dedicated his life to understanding the human brain, especially the processes that take place in the final moments of life. For him, there were no more pressing questions than these. What remains of consciousness when the body ceases its vital functions? Is there any form of record, any trace of activity that can be detected after physical death? His hypothesis was controversial. He believed that if there was something beyond death, be it a residual form of energy or some manifestation not yet understood by science, it would be possible to capture it with the right technology. And it was with this premise that Limit Codes was designed, an experiment that promised to explore one of science's darkest frontiers. The plan was bold and involved cutting-edge technologies: ultra-sensitive cameras, thermal sensors capable of detecting minute variations in temperature, and microphones calibrated to pick up frequencies that go beyond the human range. Each piece of equipment was designed to withstand extreme environments and operate without interference for days, even underground. The aim was to continuously monitor events inside a coffin during the period when the body undergoes its first transformations after death. But there was another, darker motive that led Dr. Vance to propose this experiment. During his years of study, he collected hundreds of reports from patients who had had near-death experiences. Many described sights, sounds, and sensations that seemed to transcend physical reality. Tunnels of light, familiar voices, and even encounters with deceased loved ones. Although traditional science attributed these experiences to chemical responses in the dying brain, Dr. Vance always believed that there was something more, something that science could not yet measure. With the right funding, the experiment was approved. But it needed a team willing to go on the journey. Specialists from various fields were brought together: neurologists, engineers, audio and video technicians, as well as a small group of assistants. Despite their impressive credentials, not everyone was entirely comfortable with the idea. Many expressed ethical concerns. There was something unsettling about putting cameras inside a coffin, as if it were disrespectful to the dead or an invitation to mess with forces beyond human comprehension. But Dr. Vance insisted that the work was purely scientific. He assured everyone that the project would be conducted with the utmost respect for the deceased and their families. The bodies would be donated by volunteers who had consented in life to their remains being used for scientific research. There would be nothing invasive or disrespectful, just the search for the truth. The first test was planned meticulously. A 45-year-old man, the victim of a massive heart attack, would be the initial subject. He had signed the paperwork months before, allowing his body to be used for scientific studies after his death. He was a staunch supporter of scientific advancement and believed that, even in death, he could contribute to something greater. The coffin used in the experiment was different from conventional ones. It was designed with a structure that allowed the equipment to be installed without compromising the integrity of the internal environment. The camera, positioned at the top, would capture the entire space with precision. Microphones and sensors were adjusted to detect any change, no matter how small. In addition, the coffin was equipped with redundant power systems to ensure that nothing interfered with data collection. But the preparation was not without its problems. Right from the start, members of the team reported unexplained incidents. One technician claimed to have heard voices in the lab while the equipment was being assembled, voices that no one else was able to confirm. Another reported recurring, disturbing dreams in which he saw unknown faces inside the coffin. These reports, although dismissed by management as stress or psychological suggestion, began to create an atmosphere of tension among the team. However, the science moved on. On the night of the experiment, the tension in the laboratory was almost palpable. The coffin was buried in an isolated place, far from outside interference. A small group remained on site to monitor the equipment, while the rest of the team watched remotely from a control room in the lab. However, no one was prepared for what would happen next. The first 12 hours went as expected, with the monitoring recording the expected events according to the principles of forensic science. Changes in the subject's body gradually began to occur, captured in detail by the cameras and sensors installed. It was a meticulous and, in a way, monotonous procedure. But no one on the team could relax. There was something in the air, a collective nervousness that no one could explain. Some attributed it to the weight of what they were trying to achieve. After all, they were literally observing death in real time. But deep down, everyone knew that this feeling went beyond the tension of simple scientific research. Then, around the 13th hour, something unexpected happened. The cameras picked up a small variation of light inside the coffin, a kind of diffuse glow that seemed to emanate from the corpse's chest. Initially, the scientists attributed this to internal reflections from the equipment. But as they analyzed the data, they realized that the phenomenon didn't align with any plausible technical explanation. There were no external light sources and no faults in the equipment. The glow was just there, appearing and disappearing irregularly, as if it were pulsating. The laboratory fell silent as all eyes were fixed on the main screen. "This doesn't make sense," muttered one of the technicians, adjusting the controls to enlarge the image. The glow seemed to change in intensity, almost like a beat, but it was impossible to determine its origin. An initial analysis ruled out any known chemical reaction that could explain the phenomenon. "Maybe it's some kind of gas emission or reaction with the materials in the coffin," someone suggested, trying to find logic in the inexplicable. But Dr. Vance didn't seem convinced. He was motionless, his eyes fixed on the screen, as if he were trying to absorb something that his years of study had never prepared him to see. And then the sound came. At first, it was a low, almost imperceptible noise, something that could easily have gone unnoticed. But the ultra-sensitive microphones picked it all up. It was a muffled sound, as if something was trying to manifest itself from somewhere far away. Everyone in the lab leaned closer to the screens, turning up the volume. The sound started to become clearer, but it was difficult to describe. It didn't sound mechanical or natural. It was something between a sigh and a whisper. "It could be the movement of body gases," suggested the chief engineer, his voice betraying his own uncertainty. But as the sound intensified, the possibility of a conventional explanation became less likely. It seemed to carry a pattern, something vaguely reminiscent of a rhythm or even an attempt at word formation. That's when the sound became clear enough for everyone to hear. A name. A name that none of those present recognized. "What was that?" asked an assistant, panic evident in her voice. The name was repeated, this time more clearly. It seemed to come directly from the microphone positioned inside the coffin. "This can't be real," said another technician, frantically adjusting the equipment to check for any interference. But the systems were working perfectly, without any sign of intrusion or malfunction. Dr. Vance remained calm as he ordered the technicians to record every detail. "Keep recording. Don't interrupt anything," he said, his voice firmer than anyone expected. He knew they were witnessing something that, regardless of its origin, could change everything they knew about the limits of life and death. The pulsating glow in the corpse's chest began to intensify, and the thermal sensors detected a surprising anomaly. There was a gradual increase in temperature coming from the same point. This made no sense. After 13 hours, the body should have been chilled and in an advanced state of cadaveric rigidity. But the data showed the opposite. The spot where the glow was concentrated had a higher temperature than its surroundings, as if something was generating heat inside the body. Could it be a delayed reaction of the nervous system? Someone suggested, but the idea was quickly dismissed. Nothing in the medical or scientific literature supported such a hypothesis. The glow continued to pulsate, now almost rhythmically, and the sound coming from the microphone seemed to react to it, as if the two were connected. The name was heard again, this time louder, followed by something that sounded like a fragmented sentence. An assistant began to cry silently, her eyes fixed on the screen. "This isn't natural. This shouldn't be happening," she whispered, but no one responded. Everyone was hypnotized, unable to look away. Suddenly, the equipment picked up a new change. The motion sensor, calibrated to detect even the slightest vibrations, registered a shift inside the coffin. It was small, almost imperceptible, but enough to trigger alerts in the laboratory. "Movement detected in compartment 1A, announced an automated voice, cutting through the silence. "Impossible," said the chief engineer, checking the data. "The body is completely still. There's no way anything inside that coffin could have moved." But the data didn't lie. Something was happening inside, and no one could explain what. The glow on the monitor began to expand, illuminating more parts of the coffin, while the sound in the microphones reached a volume that bordered on unbearable. And then everything suddenly stopped. The glow disappeared, the sound ceased, and the sensors returned to normal. The silence that invaded the laboratory was more deafening than any scream. Every person in the room was frozen, breathing hard, as if the air itself had become dense and heavy. No one dared speak, but everyone knew what they had witnessed was only the prelude. Even with the monitors stabilized and the sensors returning to normal readings, the atmosphere was permeated with a sense that something was far from over. Dr. Vance's eyes, normally so calculating, were now fixed on the main monitor, his mind frantically processing possibilities that even he, with years of experience and an almost reverential respect for science, couldn't explain. "Restart the recording systems. I want every microsecond documented from now on," he ordered, his voice firm but with an almost imperceptible hesitation. It was the first time his assistants had seen anything resembling fear in him. But before anyone could respond, the unexpected happened. A new pulse wave appeared on the thermal monitor. This time, it was much more intense and located not only in the corpse's chest, but also in the limbs and head. "This isn't a technical anomaly," declared the chief engineer, almost mournfully. "We're seeing something real." The motion sensors went off again. It wasn't just a subtle shift like before. It was something more forceful, more deliberate. The body's right arm, which was rigid in a resting position, moved about 3 centimeters to the side. It was enough to set everyone's heart racing in the lab. A younger technician shouted involuntarily, his panic echoing around the room. It could just be a post-mortem reflex, someone tried to argue, their voice cracking with tension. But no one believed that explanation anymore. The sensors weren't lying. The movement wasn't random. It seemed intentional. And then the sound came again, this time clearer than ever. It was no longer a name or indecipherable fragments. It was an entire sentence, spoken with a clarity that made the hairs on the back of everyone's neck stand on end. "Why am I here?" The room plunged into a contained panic, the assistants looking at each other for answers that no one had. Dr. Vance, despite the terror evident in his eyes, maintained his composure. He knew they were witnessing something that transcended any frontier of human knowledge. He also knew that running away or interrupting the experiment was not an option. "Keep recording. Don't turn anything off," he ordered, as if his own sanity depended on it. But things were only just beginning. The glow that had once been a discrete anomaly now illuminated the entire interior of the coffin, leaking through the edges of the lid. It was a pulsating, almost hypnotic glow that made everyone feel a mixture of fascination and primal fear. "It's coming from inside the body," said the thermal analyst, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Open the coffin." The phrase, spoken by Dr. Vance, dropped like a bomb in the room. "What? That's against all protocols," protested one of the assistants. But the chief scientist was determined. "We need to know what's going on in there. If we stop now, we'll never understand." Reluctantly, the technicians prepared the system to open the coffin, while others reinforced the security measures. The glow continued to pulse, and the sound, that unmistakable voice, repeated fragmented phrases, as if something or someone was struggling to communicate. "They're watching. They're coming. I can't go back." When the coffin lid was finally opened, the laboratory was filled with a blinding light. The body was there, still motionless, but something was different. On the corpse's chest, exactly where the glow originated, there was a kind of mark. It looked like a scar in the shape of a symbol, something that no one could immediately identify. And then the corpse moved again, this time undeniably intentionally. The head turned slowly, the eyes, which should have been dull and lifeless, now glowed with the same pulsating hue that illuminated the coffin. And before anyone could react, the corpse's mouth opened. "The truth is buried." The phrase echoed through the laboratory like thunder, and at that moment, all the lights in the room went out. The monitors flickered, and a wave of energy swept through the room, knocking over equipment and leaving everyone in complete chaos. When the power was restored a few seconds later, the coffin was empty. The body was gone. Dr. Vance, still stunned, looked around the lab. No one knew what to do or what to say. But one thing was certain: what they had witnessed was not just science. It was something that completely escaped human comprehension. Something that might better never have been discovered. When the light finally returned to the laboratory, the silence was not one of relief, but of sheer terror. Where once there had been chaos and movement, now there was only the inexplicable absence of the body, leaving a void that no one knew how to fill. Dr. Vance stood in the center of the room, his eyes fixed on the empty coffin. His lips trembled, but no words came out. As a scientist, he had spent his life searching for answers in the physical world, but now he was confronted with something that completely escaped logic. It was as if all the laws he believed governed the universe had been suspended for an instant. The attendees, many still stuck in their chairs, seemed to be in a state of shock. One of them muttered something about erasing the records, destroying the evidence, and never talking about what happened again. But Dr. Vance knew that wasn't possible. The experiment had crossed the line between science and something bigger, something unknown, something he didn't even want to name. They had opened a door, and whatever was on the other side now knew there was someone watching. The monitors flashed intermittently, trying to process data that seemed absurd. Energy readings that made no sense, recordings that seemed to blur the lines between sound and image, capturing noises and figures that were impossible to describe. But the most terrifying truth wasn't in the data. It was in the feeling that everyone in the room shared, even without saying it. They were no longer alone. Hours later, the laboratory was evacuated. The order came not from Dr. Vance, but from higher-up agencies that were monitoring the research and that apparently knew a lot more than they were willing to admit. The project was shut down, the data classified, and each member of the team forced to sign documents guaranteeing their silence. But Dr. Vance couldn't sleep. He couldn't ignore the corpse's final words. The truth is buried. They were more than a warning. They were an enigma. And deep down, he knew he wouldn't be the only one looking for the answer. The disappearance of the body was not the end. It was the beginning of something much bigger, something that humanity was not yet ready to face. If this story gave you goosebumps, imagine the next ones we have to tell. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you never miss stories that challenge everything you believe in. And for those of you who like a good story and watch to the end, leave your comment. I stayed until the end. Remember, the most valuable lessons come from the most difficult moments. See you in the next video.